problem in society we have at the moment is everyone is afraid of making a mistake.
What may happen if we don't do anything?
The pandemic has changed life as we know it. But what comes next? Will our fast-paced lives pick up again? Will we continue to innovate, regardless of the cost? Live lives profit-driven and globally connected? Or has this pandemic sparked irrevocable change? How will we live in the future after the pandemic?
Hello and welcome to DW's COVID-19 special. I'm Stephen Beardsley in Berlin. Well, this week we're taking a look ahead at life after the pandemic, from what it means for cities to economies and even nutrition. A recent study has linked higher obesity rates with higher COVID death rates. The World Obesity Federation report says COVID death rates were 10 times higher in countries where the population was on average overweight. Further, almost 90% of COVID deaths occurred in countries with high obesity rates. The report calls for people living with obesity to have priority access to vaccines. Meanwhile, the pandemic itself has increased hunger and malnutrition around parts of the world. Take Brazil. For the first time, a whopping half of Brazilians don't have access to safe and nutritious food. That's according to Reddy Pensann, a local food research group. Lines are swelling by the day at soup kitchens and food distribution points in the country. Experts say the sharp increase in food insecurity is due to job losses caused by the pandemic. Pauline Schielbeck is assistant professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and she joins me from London. Pauline, it's good to have you on the show. What has the pandemic taught us about past choices when it comes to nutrition?
The pandemic has taught us that that disruption or disruptive events in our lifestyle do lead to changes in the foods that we eat and the choices that we make. So initial data shows that people certainly have changed their diets in the pandemic for the better and worse as well. For some people that improved their diets, and for others it made their diets worse. And what exactly that is, so was it that because they spend more time at home, because was it because other things in the supermarket were on offer, or they had more time to cook their meals, for example? We don't exactly know yet, but diets have certainly changed.
Do you think that some of those obesity rates we mentioned just previously, that may lead some people to rethink perhaps the way they're eating? Does it give people time during the pandemic? What is it that makes people have a rethink?
I think time is certainly an issue there. And what might be really interesting is to see, to kind of isolate that group of people that started eating better, started eating more fruits and vegetables. And remember, this comes in a food system where, or in a world where a very small proportion of people actually adhere to sufficient fruit and vegetables as per the different guidelines in countries or by the WHO. Quite a small percentage adheres to that. And you see that in a pandemic, a proportion of people have very much increased their consumption of healthy foods such as fruits and vegetables and legumes, and reduced unhealthy foods, whereas others didn't. So what would be really important, and a kind of a lesson that we can take out of the pandemic when going forwards in terms of food systems and diets for the future, is to see what were those barriers that were removed by the pandemic for these people that led to these improvements of their diets, and can we use that to learn a little bit about what sort of leverage points we have in the food system, in supermarkets, in homes of people, in perhaps even further skills on how to cook certain foods from scratch that would remove those barriers for others as well, so that they could improve on their diets as well.
It sounds like you believe that some of these changed habits, whether good or bad, could stay beyond the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely. I think people certainly, and then again, we're talking a little bit more about the group that experienced an improvement of their diets. might also be the ones that kind of got a little bit more in touch with what they're actually eating on a daily basis. So there's less running out of the office, going to the supermarket and buy a ready-to-eat meal, and there's more cooking from scratch. So you will be more aware then naturally how much salt goes in there, oils, fats, etc., and a few more of the unhealthy or the foods that we eat too much of.
We've also seen.
And so yes, I guess. Sorry.
Oh, I just want to say we've also seen during this pandemic that food supply itself has changed. What has that meant for nutrition in terms of getting fresh food?
Yeah, so this is a really important lesson and something that perhaps some scientists have been warning about for a while, but our food system is really quite fragile. You see it in the UK. I'm most familiar with the environment here, but certainly also in other countries in Europe and in fact actually everywhere globally. And what we see is that most countries also have they have food stocks for only a few days. You're very much dependent on other countries. Once the borders close, that really poses a problem to stock supermarkets, for example. But we also see that disruptions, and in this case it was a pandemic, but it could also be natural disaster, climate change, civil
Brexit.
Unrest in the countries that we're sourcing from, that would could certainly lead to all of a sudden products not being available in a supermarket or prices going up. And especially fruits and vegetables, we do get them often from countries that are vulnerable to these types of disruption. And that could ultimately lead, for example, to increased prices of fruits and vegetables in your supermarkets, which naturally then would disproportionately affect those that struggle a little bit in buying their daily supermarket.
I was going to say that the Brexit. I'm sorry, I was just going to say that the Brexit also apparently in the UK has obviously been changing some of those supply lines as well. I just want to ask, how can we better plan food supply lines when we know what we've known from the pandemic and from Brexit, for example? Are there any lessons there?
Yes, absolutely. I think mapping out where everything is currently coming from, how much of that is, for example, domestically produced, what sort of storage and stocks do we have, and are there certain pivotal foods or food groups that are particularly vulnerable or non-resilient in that sense, and is there ways how to inform the consumers but also the producers about these vulnerabilities and see how perhaps there are some substitutions to make there to make food systems much more sustainable and make sure that the supply is resilient.
Really quick, could it mean more growing locally, for example, instead of importing stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially because in a more sustainable world, we would be looking at improving our plant-based food consumption anyway. So that we would need to find ways to source these foods, which could be locally. Not to say that trade with lower income countries or so is a bad thing per se. Of course, their GDPs depend on export with countries in the global north as well. But certainly looking at ways how to minimize the externalities for health, but also for the environment is certainly something that we could improve upon.
We'll have to leave it there. Pauline Schilbeek, thank you very much. London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Over to our science correspondent, Derek Williams, now with a question that goes straight to the gut.
You hear a lot about the microbiome in health. What is it, and why is it so important?
The term microbiome describes the entirety of the microbial community that inhabits an organism like a human. It's made up of a huge number of microorganisms. Even conservative estimates say that there are more microbes living in or on you than there are cells in your entire body carrying your own DNA. But because most microbes are much smaller than body cells, if you put every one of them in your microbiome on a scale, it'd only weigh a couple of kilos, with most of the microbes coming from the gut. The average human is home to over 10,000 microbial species, many of which play, for example, vital roles in digestion. And over the last half a century, scientists have discovered that the makeup and the balance of those species in an individual's microbiome plays a fundamental role in health and can be linked to many medical conditions. Just look, for instance, at a recent large-scale study on aging and the microbiome. The authors found that in the elderly, reduced populations of common bacterial species in the gut were associated with overall better health. Aging people whose bacterial balance remained more static over time didn't live as long on average. Although it's really tough to clarify cause and effect in a system as complex as the human microbiome, links to both health and illness have been established in fields from allergy science to cardiovascular disease to neurological disorders like Alzheimer's. It'll take a lot more research, though, to pin down exactly in what ways it's important to specific health issues. But many common diseases might one day soon be treated by tweaking a patient's microbiome.
Our science expert, Derek Williams there. That's it for our show today. Thanks for watching. As always, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.